Hey, hi, welcome. We are here, Free the Soprano Player, with one of the seven wonders of this crazy world, Gilad Atzmon. I know you know this guy. This guy is everywhere. He's up to all sorts of great stuff. Extraterrestrial, saxophonist, exotic performer, well-known political activist, writer, novelist. He does everything. And most
I'm not an
recently,
activist. I'm very active. I'm not an activist. I'm everything except an activist. I really don't like being described as activist, and I don't like activists in general. But except that, you're right. I'm really a special human being, like
do you
yourself.
have another word you would like me to replace that with?
No, I think that you had enough superlatives to keep my mom happy for the next generation.
Yeah, your
Yeah.
political involvement is I know a really key component of just who you are as a human being, a writer, and with your music. So how would you, just separate from that, how would you define it then, if you don't really like the idea of being called an activist?
No, I don't like the idea of. I'm not an activist. The difference between activists and philosophers is that activists always know the answers for everything.
Yeah.
Biden, they always know the answers, and I'm more of a philosopher. What I do, I refine questions. So as such, I'm not even politically involved. I've never been a member of any party or anything as such. But what I do instead, I try to understand the meaning of events.
Yeah.
So, for instance, we have this election in America, and you are an American, and a lot of people are upset. And for me, it is very interesting to understand what is the meaning of this event. How is it possible that, for instance, the pollsters basically predicted that Trump is wiped out, and in practice, he actually managed to get many more supporters, and many of them are actually Latinos and Black, and what the left called diverse minority. What is happening there? Without taking a side whether I'm pro Trump or pro Biden, for as far as I can tell, all politicians are, I hate all politicians equally. All right, so this is not the issue. I'm not. For me, to understand what is this political moment, and for instance, when I look into Trump, I find it very, very interesting because the GOP, the Republican Party, has become now the party of the working class. Now, the Democratic Party always claimed to be the party of the working class. Biden was there despite of his age and his cognitive condition, that some people have some doubts about it, because he's a working class figure. And still, Trump managed to gain a lot of power. And I'm about to write about it, probably will write about it in the next 2 days. I realized that Trump, in terms of, in the most kind of metaphorical terms, is basically Fritz Lang's Metropolis, the leader figure. I don't know if you remember this film. It's a very, very important film, and every person should watch a Metropolis once a year, especially now, because
I'm
it
due
is a
for a
story.
rewatch, I'll admit it.
You remember the film. So basically, there is this city under the city where all the workers are, and they are extremely oppressed. And eventually, it's the son of the leader of the city, the millionaire kid, who becomes the leader, who actually find a way to bond the workers with the upper world. When you think about it, when you look at the map of America, and this will mean something to you, all those people in the flyover states, the states that, the underground city. Are we Trump? So it's really Metropolis, all right? And his wife, first lady for the time being, she's Cinderella. So you see, so I try to analyze political events to understand what do they mean in terms of eternity, in terms of our culture, in terms of our fairy tales, in terms of collective archetypes.
Yeah. And how do you end up applying this? I mean, how do these, getting into these types of conversations and examining these archetypes, as you say, and, you know, in terms of our own personal or collective fairy tale, how does this influence your music, the music that you create and the people that you find to create it with? I mean,
because
it's a conversation.
I tell you what it is. It's for me, the musical moment is the same thing. It's the same thing. And what we should all look when we make music or art is to create a moment of beauty. Now, not many people look into it because we are living in an era, you know, from 20th century where music, where art become industrialized. We have a show business. The cultural industry, to use the post-modernist terms and so on and so on. And when you're living in a cultural industry for many years, and I was a producer, your aim is not necessarily to produce beauty, but to manage to squeeze a few bucks, a few dollars out of a song, out of a painting, out of a sculpture. Luckily, the music industry collapsed. So nobody expects to make any money out of it anymore. Some of us, I was making money till last March, you know, but since then we are not playing at all, kind of performing, touring. But I go back to your question. If the main task is to create beauty, to find beauty, to search for beauty. So as a musician, I also try to look for these archetypes, and the model that I found, and it's a very dialectic model, and I never spoke about it. I spoke a lot about it with my student when I was teaching in university or whatever, in the Royal Academy I was teaching for a while. I tried to elaborate on this model, but it's a very simple model. In music, we have, let me see if I can do it. Maybe I can do it. I don't know if you will hear it. In music, we have notions of consonance and dissonance. You heard these notions before? I'm sure that you did. So in classical music, let me see if, audio. Let me just create a track here. And let me see. Can you hear anything?
Yeah.
Okay, no, because I don't know how it works, what goes into the Zoom. And so in music, we speak usually about consonance and dissonance. And the traditional notions of consonance, the classical notions of consonance and dissonance is basically based on some intervals. So for instance, this, is it loud enough?
Yeah, I can hear.
You can hear it, yeah? Monitor. Okay. This is a consonance, yeah? It kind of sounds nice. This is a consonant. This is consonance. Yeah? And this is a dissonance. Yeah? This is a dissonance. And the nature of dissonance is kind of, it wants to be resolved. It wants to move into somewhere else. So in classical music, we have, for instance, This is a dissonance. It's a very famous dissonance. It's a tritone, and it's usually resolved into this. Yeah, so it's kind of something slightly problematic, and it resolves, or the same. All right. Now, in the 20th century, this changed a lot. And instead of talking about intervals that are resolving from dissonance to consonance, we started to think about this consonance as continuum, continuity, continuum, and dissonance as disruption. So if I have something like it was clear what was the dissonance, yeah? But if I have something like, sorry, I'm a bit loud. If I have something, all right, so now that which was before dissonance is now become the consonance, and the nice line is kind of disrupting the. So we are dealing with dialectics, and the art of beauty is very simple in theory, is to find the perfect match between consonance and dissonance. So at the end of the day, it's a philosophical investigation that is very dialectical. You are a poet. You create something and you create a sound. You are a beat poet, so you create a sound and you create a theme. And if you don't break it in the right moment, people will fall asleep or they leave the room. This is the art. This is what beauty is all about. It's finding this magic point between the consonant and the dissonant, the consonants and the dissonance.
And these days, you have some people.
For me, sorry, say it again.
I said, in these days, you have seemed to find a pretty sweet setup in the trio that you have right now, in terms of this kind of a conversation that you have and the ability to not need to direct one another, but it just kind of coming together without setting playlists, without having.
Let me tell you something that is quite embarrassing. I'm not very good in communicating my ideas, partially because I'm not an educated musician. So I would say that I know very little, and some people wouldn't agree with it, but because I play things that are considered quite complicated. But if it gets to the point where I have to explain to people what I mean, or what I want to play, or what I want to hear, I get really upset. I get really upset not because they are stupid, but probably because I'm too stupid or not scholarly enough to explain what I really want. So what I really did all my life, I always try to play with musicians who are slightly better than me. And you would think that it becomes more and more complicated as you get better, but it's the other way around.
Yeah.
The better you get, a lot of great musicians also want to play with you. And this is how you create a great communication between great minds. A lot of musicians that are kind of can be very gifted, but they are kind of an intermediate level, and they end up playing with musicians who are slightly worse than them, you know, kind of technically, or you know, the language is a bit lacking. I don't, you know, we are living, you know, life is a continuum, you know, so you're getting better sometime, most of the time, hopefully, or whatever. But what is happening is that a lot of the time they find jam sessions very frustrating, and they didn't think that they played very well, but it wasn't entirely their fault. It would happen to me that I go to a jam session and I play with someone and he's not, the swing is not there, or whatever, completely. And I would try to do things and they wouldn't sound right. And the way around it is always to play with what you have in the room. You invited me to a jam. It was the end of last lockdown or something like that. Or the first or second week we were out of the lockdown, and the people I played with, they were not jazz musicians, and they were very folkish oriented, or country and blues and so on and so on.
Oh,
and
yes,
I
at
really
John's house. Yeah.
Huh?
Yeah, when you came to John's house.
Yeah, and I played with them, with their music, and it was a lot of fun. If I would try to do, oh, can we play giant steps, you know, and it would be a disaster. You always have to play. You always have to be flexible and to enjoy this flexible moment. You know, groove. Groove is something that is very difficult to define. You know, something, oh, you have groove, you have to play in front of the beat and behind the beat, and you know, and the best definition I heard for groove is that everybody plays in the same room. You know, that's what it is.
Yeah. So in terms of your, you know, your approach to music, and I mean, this can also be considered for you as a writer, as an educator, you know, as a conversationalist, but let's start with the music, of the value of that free improvisation has had. When did you start adopting that as something? Is it something you've always done? Is it something that you were introduced to, opened yourself up to? How did you develop that that relationship to not following something exactly as it is, and being able to enjoy a situation like the one that you came into, that you mentioned, you know, being able to embrace it?
It is I started to play jazz in 79 or 1980, 1979, or 1980. I was 17 years old. I heard Charlie Parker in the night, kind of in the radio. I was blown away. I think that it was Bird with Strings, because many years later, I couldn't find the album, but many years later when I heard Laura, we body do body do body. So this is the tune that I was looking for. You know, the next day, I rushed in the morning to I was living in Jerusalem. There was one record shop that sold jazz albums, and they didn't have that Bird with Strings, but they had kind of a Charlie Parker album, and I bought it, and I came home, and I remember it was very, very cheap. Yeah. You know, so let's say if a record, the vinyl, was $10, the jazz album, for some reason, they were $2. You can buy a lot, you know. And I started to listen to it, and I didn't have a clue where to. It was, I think, I know it was kind of a bird with dizzy, and everything is fast, and it's amazing. And the next, I became very enthusiastic about jazz. And it was completely new to me. And, you know, when you're 17, you preparing yourself to go to the army, you know, and I thought of military career, kind of low rank military career, because I had many plans that, you know, to study and stuff. But I believed kind of that I had to be part of this nationalist ethos, you know. We were pretty silly, and then I started to listen to jazz, and it was way more interesting than dying in an Israeli war, which was kind of a cognitive dissonance for me. And I started to get to listen to more jazz and to start to borrow albums. And my father told me that he used to love jazz, and he gave me an album of Artie Shaw, and it blew me away. Completely different style, kind of Charlie Parker, let's say 50 something, and the Artie Shaw is from the 30s. I remember the C concerts, or whatever they call it, kind of it plays very high. And I was shocked by it, but I just put the albums and I started to play with them. And a week or 2 weeks later, I kind of, it's kind of, in Israel, in kind of late night show, there was kind of a program that, well, I think it was 2-3 times a week or something, and they would kind of feature artists, and you know, it was kind of I don't remember what was the name of this program, but kind of completely out of the blue, they said, listen guys, we have something very special tonight. This musician, this saxophonist just landed in Israel. He came from Russia. He landed 5 hours ago, but we heard that he's a great saxophonist, so here he is, you know, and he started to play, and he was playing. It was amazing. And the next day I went to the jam session, the Jerusalem jam session, Friday, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And he was there. And I went on stage and told him, listen, I want to study. And his name was Boris. His name is still with us. Great musician, Boris Gamer. And he couldn't speak a word in Hebrew. I couldn't speak a word in Russian. A few years ago, somebody told me that he doesn't speak Russian as well. I don't know. I have to check it out. The communication, the lingual communication was close to zero. And a lot of people complain about him that he's not a great teacher, but he managed to teach me everything I know in 5, maybe 10 lessons. That's what I had. This is all my musical education. And I was a loose kid until I met him, and he really put me on track. He taught me how to learn. Many years later, when I was doing my advanced studies in philosophy, PhD, whatever, I dug into the work of Heidegger, and Heidegger is saying, to teach is to teach others how to learn. And that's what I try to do with my students. I developed a system that I really teach people how to teach themselves. And I do the same. I'm 57 years old, and when I pick my saxophone, every day I learn something. Every day I develop a new exercise, which is quite amazing, because when you are when I was in my 30s or my 40s, I said, oh my God, there is nothing to, what am I going to work on? And a lot of musicians say, what do you work on? What? I don't know. For me, it's never been really a problem. I always find things to work on because I always hear problems in my playing. And it's always the same problems, by the way. So I always, you know, and people, some people laugh, you know, God, you know, you play, you know, of course, you know, it's the better you get, you hear, the more attentive you become to your own difficulties. I'm sure that the same applies to superb physicists and great poets. They know that exactly when they get stuck and what are the corners they do struggle with. So basically, in the second or the third lesson, the first lesson with Boris, he told me do that. Okay, so I went home and I did fuck all. And the second lesson, he told me, all right, let me see what you did, and I wasn't good. And he gave me really, really hard time, something the teachers don't do anymore because they're not allowed to.
Yeah.
And this never happened again. You know, you want a dictator Russian teacher. This is rule number 1. And then he told me, if you want to learn how Charlie Parker thinks, go home and transcribe, write a solo. Now I could hardly write music. And I took Night in Tunisia, which is a pretty challenging tune. And I remember that I was walking on this fucking 4 bars when, you know, it's a nightmare. It's a nightmare. And it took me, the bird solo took me something like 8 hours. And I remember that I had a kind of a Panasonic tape cassette. We are talking about 79 or 80, just before there were no CDs. I think that the Walkman was invented a year later. 82, I think I had my first Walkman. And the light was so close to the tape, and I put, you know, you go play forward, backward. And at the certain stage, I smelled kind of funny smell. And basically the tape melted, you know, so kind of this, you know, kind of, it kept working, but I remember this was my Night in Tunisia tape, you know, Panasonic that I got, you know, when I kind of, as a present when I was 13 or whatever. So what I do remember that I transcribed this Night in Tunisia. And when I took the saxophone the next day and I started to play with Bird and Dizzy, I remember it. I suddenly understood what was going on. I mean, it's not that I understood everything. Suddenly, I could hear the harmony and I could hear how the lines are moving. And within 2 weeks, I was asked to join the Israeli biggest tour. There was a great kind of an Israeli musician at the time. Yoni is still with us. He's still probably one of the best musicians there. Yoni Rechter, he saw me on stage playing jazz, and I got a telephone call, and I was asked to join the tour. I never joined because it's a long story, but I had to do my exams, and I was injured at the time as well. You know, I had a serious accident that actually contributed a lot because I played like 18 hours a day. Didn't really go to school or anything. But it's never been kind of a question. It's never that I wanted to do it, and I just do things. If I find it interesting to dig into nuclear physics, I'll become a nuclear physicist in 3 months.
So is that what you're training to do now? That
No, but I tell you something else. You know, as a youngster, I was a mathematician, and when I was 22, I lost any interest. And when COVID came back, and all these people started all this bullshit about, you know, it all came back to me, and I think that only now people start to get into all those realizations that I gathered back in March and April. I like thinking. I like to do things on my own, to find answers on my own, and I'm pretty good at it. I'm sure that there are some people who are much better. Thank God for that. You know, there is room for progress.
So this whole topic about, you know, what you're talking about, having understood already back in March and April, and something that I had wanted to touch on with you, because you have spoken out about it quite a bit, you know, in recent weeks, is just this idea of now, you know, the form in which artists are contributing, you know, their form of expression is at the moment pretty much halted everywhere. And so there's been this recommendation that artists should train for another kind of vocation. And so I'm curious, both you know, in theory and in practice, how, you know, what you would like to say about that, just as far as how you're personally addressing what you might want to change, and just how you think about it as what's happening now.
It's obviously very disturbing because for most of us and most intelligent people, I don't so, you know, I wouldn't like to say most intelligent people, but many intelligent people have many doubts about the mess that we see around us. And I guess that I'm one of those. I'm one of those who have been warning, you know, I wrote books about it, that there was a bit of mess ahead of us. But I would allow myself to say that the scale of the mess took us all by surprise. It was very clear to many of us that all the problems that we are facing as human beings turned into global problems. So when I was young, or when you learn history, you learn about conflicts between neighboring states. You hear about economy disaster in one state. In the last 10, 15, 20 years, we face global climate disaster. They're talking to us about global economy disaster, and now global pandemic. One of the reasons that our problems are not anymore local, or problems with our neighbors, with our wife, with, you know, they're all global, is probably because we are dealing with a global regime. And we are not yet clever enough to identify what this global regime is. You know, we are aware of all the theories about it, whether it is Bill Gates. And I'm not going into this domain, and you know, it is an interesting topic. And if you want, we can have 1 hour and discuss all the theories that are related to those globalists. And by the way, again, it brings us back to Trump, because one of the biggest problems that there is Trump is that, and again, I don't approve of his nature or whatever, or politically, and I'm not taking sides, but Trump is definitely an anti-globalist, at least in the eyes of his supporters. This is why he doesn't want China, and so on and so on. And this is why he tried to fight against this pandemic and the measures. They said we have to open America and to take the risk, and we can. So one of the things that we see, you know, I was a musician. I was living in one country, but playing all over the world. I would do kind of touring with music for 8 months, and touring with my books for 4 months, basically, in the last 20 years, 25, 20, maybe 30 years. And now it is impossible to tour. You know, it is impossible to tour. We were talking about touring. To make one concert in Germany, I played in Germany in a festival last week. The concert was on Saturday. On Friday, I learned that on Monday they start lockdown in Germany. My band, part of my band came from Britain and from Italy. They couldn't play unless they do COVID test. But if they do COVID test and they, you know, they don't, they may even know unsymptomatic or whatever, they go into quarantine. It's a nightmare. It's a total nightmare. And we played in a theater for 400 people. We had 70 people. Yesterday, I took a gig in Britain in a theater for 600 people, but they will only be allowed 120 or 150. The clubs that I used to play in England, I don't want to do it because it's like, I cannot do it because it's a club. I really like to play in clubs of 100, 120 people because I like to see, you know, but now they can have 20. So it's all pretty messy. We don't see the end of it. Needless to mention that even before COVID, most jazz musicians were struggling. We are dealing with minority music. It's not easy. And bearing all of that in mind, I want to go for this outrageous statement that was made, I think that is what you were referring to, by the British Treasury, Sunak, who said, and maybe regretted it, he said that musicians should consider retraining. Funny enough, I'm not in any position to tell people what to do, but it's not a bad idea. It's not a bad idea, or at least if you don't want to retrain, because we don't know when we are going to play again. So I do a lot of music now in my studio.
Yeah.
Some of it.
And now it's something that you created pretty recently. You put together the studio you know, you did the whole thing yourself, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I never, I always had, because I've been a producer for many years, so I always had kind of a nice setting at home. But I kind of always liked the kind of sound of Rudy Van Gelber.
Yeah.
And I tried, kind of the old jazz, kind of blue note sound. And after so many years in the industry, not as an engineer, as a producer, I started to gather, because I work with great engineers, I started to gather how he did it, and I decided to experiment with it. And I have a few ribbon mics that is what basically they were using at the time, and I was shocked how amazing their results are. And a lot of people kind of heard it now. Say, Gilad, we want to come to record with you. I don't want to become a sound engineer. I want to do kind of one or two as a kind of a community service for people, for friends, and one of the things that we learned, and I see a lot of musicians on the net, and a lot of friends because we cannot meet because we're in different places around the globe. I spent last week few days with my band after not seeing them for a few months. In the summer, I was teaching in Germany in my school with all my friends. And it was amazing to see that all the musicians that I met, and obviously I didn't meet every musician, they are all in great spirit, especially great musicians that used to work every night. And why? I started to play when I was 17, 18, and immediately developed the United Army in kind of 3 years. But then I had a career. I never had the time to work on those things that I really want to work on. So I accumulated a lot of issues that I had to deal with. I always want to pick the guitar and rather than to move beyond this kind of 2.5 chords, And suddenly I understood it, and I'm getting better. And every musician that I speak with, a lot of us doing sport, we live the most idiotic, horrendous lifestyle. We wake up at 11 o'clock in the morning, we drink coffee. I won't mention, but I was touring with a great, great guitar player. He's not with us anymore for 2-3 years. And kind of, I wake up for breakfast in Germany and I say, it's kind of with the second pint. And I ask him, beer, and I ask him, what are you doing, man? I won't mention his name. And he said, man, I cannot have breakfast on an empty stomach. So we were, a lot of us kind of, a lot of drinking and drugs and so on and so on. And suddenly we don't have kebab at 2 o'clock, 2 a.m., after a gig, gyro, souvlaki, whatever. And a lot of us doing sport, recreation. I myself do a lot of sport. I lost a lot of weight. So it's not a bad idea to rethink about what you want to do, to accept that the world may be different. I don't know how many jazz clubs are going to be open when all of that is over, and how many people will be interested in our music. But we have now this Zoom, and we can do live streaming, and we can do library music, and we can do some beautiful music. A lot of musicians are already working, doing different things, and they actually love music more.
Yeah.
I write less now when I'm at home every day than when I was touring. Because when I was touring, I knew, oh shit, I'm taking a flight, so I would take stuff to, in the airport, everybody go duty free. I'm kind of uploading stuff. I read it in the first 2 hours of the flight, then I, create my discourse analysis or produce my own text. And now I'm way more relaxed about life. One of the things that we found is that we can live from very little, we don't need much to live, we need to eat. What else do we need? We need to eat. That's all. We need to eat. We need to eat. There is mortgage a bit, and a bit of rent, and a lot of us were working. I'm one of those. I have been working like a maniac, running, playing every night, playing sessions, playing, teaching, and I never saw any of that money because I spent it on a lot of things that I didn't need. And my needs are very limited. And musicians, what do we need? We need a guitar, we need a saxophone, we need a piano, and that's it. That's all we need. You even need less. You just need a notebook and a pen.
Pen, yeah. I'm good.
All right? That's all.
Life.
That's all. That's all. And even if you're, many years ago, when I started to play, when I started to produce, it was very expensive to make albums. I remember my first album that I produced in Israel, the budget was $40,000. And this was a medium budget, all right? The next album that I produced was $120,000. It sounds like big money, but this wasn't big money.
Yeah.
All right? It wasn't big money. A mix for a tune used to take us, I'm not making it up, 2-3 days. The engineer would come for the first day and he would mute all the kind of empty beats, to make sure that there is no noise. In England, I produced some big stuff, major kind of artists, and the budget was £7,000, $10,000 in studios. And I can produce now at home for nothing. All right? All I need is coffee. I'm sitting here, I sit here, I can produce now in my studio now. All my microphones, it's peanuts. It's peanuts. It's peanuts. It costs nothing.
Let's play some music, and by let's play some music, I mean you will play the music, and I will encourage you on this journey. Are you ready?
So what do I have to do? Tell me again.
So I will just show you something. You will look at it and you will free improvise in response to it for as long as you want. We'll do this 3 times. So your first object is this very small clown hat. It's just a very tiny clown hat worn by either small clowns or people that wish to spread joy with small hats. So this is your first prompt. Yeah. Great. Your second prompt
Yeah.
is the I Ching, the Book of Changes.
I don't know this book, believe it or not. Who is it by? And I don't know anything about this book. I'm sorry.
Ah, look it up afterwards. It's a form of divination, Chinese form of divination, very old, more than 5,000 years old.
And it's
It's right up your alley. It's like the oracles, their way of talking about the human experience through their symbolism of hexagrams. Yeah, check this out. It's definitely.
Okay, so open it in the middle.
Okay, maybe it's also because it is the unknown. Let me show you. Let me find some symbols. Let's see. There we go.
Okay, this. I don't know.
Thank you. And the last one is
it from you or from me?
This guy, Mitsotakis, with some graffiti behind him that reads War and Joy. So this is the last, War and Joy. Hey, that was great. Thank you for humoring all of us with this game and going along with it.
I'm not convinced by my performance, but let me see that it was recording it. I'm going to send it to you straight away.
Great. Thanks so much for this, Gilad. It was a lot of fun.